An AEW star is talking publicly about WWE working with AEW. I'm going to tell you guys why I think it could happen, plus so much more right here on the Ango Show. Welcome back to TAS, guys. I want to kick things off talking about the AEW brand split because it was rumored at some point it would happen. Now, Sean Ross Sapp has talked about this in a recent podcast during a Q&A session. When asked about AEW having a brand split or having any talks of a brand split, he did confirm that there have no been talks of a brand split happening at all. He says, no, that was there before CM Punk and Collision, but they didn't end up doing that. There were actually memos sent out before the Punk Collision thing. Now, listen, I understand not everybody truly listens to the criticism that I have with AEW. It's not what's the story. It's not that AEW doesn't tell stories. It's none of that. My issue is things happen on TV without a purpose or a long-term direction. And then there is no follow-up on it consistently every single week. I'd like to say that storylines need to breathe a little bit. There is far too much happening in AEW, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but everything could be much more improved if you allow storylines to breathe. Now, the reason why I think this is a really good thing for WWE having the brand split is because every single week you are allowing those storylines to progress on Mondays. Not on Fridays, right? Like Fridays and Mondays, they don't like pollinate with each other. They do not cross paths. So on SmackDown, if you're telling the story of a split between Grayson Waller and Austin Theory, you're not going to have to wait a couple weeks for it to happen on Raw. You're going to see a follow-up every single week. I feel like AEW needs to take that same strategy, especially because they do typically have some really good stories, especially now in the women's division. We're seeing it so much more often where even without a championship belt, there are storylines for the women. But the thing is, if it happens on Dynamite, it might not happen on Dynamite the following week. It might happen on Rampage. It might happen on Collision. There's no synergy there. And that seems to be one of my largest criticisms. And I do believe that having a brand split does help that situation. Now, I'm not saying AEW needs to promote a brand split. I'm not saying that they need to have general managers. Yes, I'm in big favor of that because I was pitching it for a very long time and WWE did it. People are starting to see the positives of it. But AEW doesn't even have to be all that extra. I just think if you have a split brand between Collision and Rampage, two-hour shows, stories on Dynamite have follow-up on the very next week of Dynamite, and stories on Collision have a follow-up on the very next episode of Collision. Did I say that right? I think you get my point. My point that I'm making is if there's a brand split, it just makes things a little bit easier. And pretty often the biggest concern that people have with AEW is continuity and momentum. This solves both of those problems. Ladies and gentlemen, Gable Steveson has signed with the Buffalo Bills. No, he didn't sign with AEW. He didn't sign with TNA. He didn't sign with MLW. He is not sticking around in wrestling because he decided to play defensive tackle for the NFL. And I'm scratching my head here. NFL insider Adam Schefter reported that the WWE wrestler is signing with the Buffalo Bills, a 3-year rookie deal, standard deal, and he's expected to play defensive line. When speaking with ESPN, Gable Steveson had said, I have been fortunate to compete at the highest level of competition in my sport, but I'm looking forward to the challenge of seeing how my wrestling skills may translate to football. I'm grateful to Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, and the Buffalo Bills organization for giving me this opportunity. Yeah, why am I scratching my head? Gable Steveson doesn't play football. Didn't play football. He's not known for football. Quietly released from the WWE. Now he gets to play in the NFL. Now I watch a little bit of football. I'm a Lions fan. I'm not worried about this move at all. But I do find it very interesting that this guy is going completely left field and going into something completely different. We saw Brock Lesnar do it. Gable Steveson is not a Brock Lesnar. There's a lot of people trying to make it into the NFL. A lot of people. Now, I've never seen this guy play, but I could argue that somebody who's played football for 10, 15 years of their life versus somebody who's never played football in their life, I can argue that the more experienced player is better. Gable Steveson didn't have a great reputation in the WWE for being somebody who works incredibly hard. Trevor Lee, aka Cameron Grimes, was outspoken about that on social media after this news. My point that I'm making is that Gable Stevenson's getting a handout. And if he's good on the football field, good for him. Good for him. But at the same time, too, it's kind of disappointing. It's kind of disappointing. He gets to skip the line. There's people in the XFL, USFL, you know, that type of league that's going on. There's people there that have been working their entire life trying to make it to the NFL. And these guys don't get that opportunity. There was kids who went to college who didn't get drafted and are not getting that opportunity. And I just think it's a little bit silly that somebody could just kind of cut the line and get things handed to them because they won an Olympic gold medal in wrestling. Not football, but in wrestling. Now, had he gone to the UFC or Bellator or PFL, 1FC, something like that, I would have said, okay, I understand. That experience would be helpful. But we're talking about football. We're not talking about wrestling. We're talking about football. Very strange. Very, very strange. All right, guys, let's talk about Swerve Strickland in a new interview talking about WWE working with AEW. He was on the Bootleg Kev podcast. He says if there's ever a time it could happen, now is more likely than it's ever been. I don't think either person, Tony Khan and Triple H, are opposed. I don't think there's ever been a time that's more likely than now. Very interesting comments coming from the world champion. I'm a huge fan of Swerve. I feel like AEW has booked Swerve far better than WWE ever did. Obviously, his run in NXT was awesome. When he first got to AEW, it's no secret, I did not like the idea of him being in a tag team with Keith Lee. You guys, if you find the video, shout out to you. But there is a video out there. It exists. And I specifically said they should not be a tag team because these guys should be treated as a big deal as soon as they get in. These are future world champions. It took a while to get here, but Swerve is a world champion. I wouldn't have waited that long, but I'm excited to see what has happened for this guy because he's incredibly talented. He's incredibly talented. Let's not sugarcoat it. He's incredibly talented. Now AEW has to book him as the right champion, but he's the guy. He's talking about them working together. Now you guys might think this is not possible. I say never in pro wrestling. A couple things need to change. For one, Tony Khan needs to change his mentality towards WWE. Because Tony Khan, and I'm not saying I'm not saying there's no justification behind it. Please do not get it twisted. But at the end of the day, AEW would benefit far more than WWE would by working together. But I do think it's important that we acknowledge that the behavior from Tony Khan on social media and in the media scrums, that is something that could deter them from working with WWE. They call themselves the challenger brand. If that opportunity arises where you could work together, being the challenger brand could really hurt you. Why do I say never? Well, because it's pro wrestling and crazier things have happened. Crazier things could happen. Now, with that being said, do I think Triple H is dying to work with AEW? No, I think Triple H took NXT losing the Wednesday Night Wars very personal. I do think that. So if that is the case, here is my belief. There could be a time where it truly just makes sense for them to work together. It might not be this year. It might not be next year. It is far more likely that Triple H and the WWE would work with Tony Khan and AEW than Vince McMahon ever would. And even though I said Triple H might take it personal that he lost the Wednesday Night Wars or whatever, NXT is kicking ass right now. They're actually pretty neck and neck with AEW right now. So it's a very interesting concept, but it could make sense for them to work together. There's a lot of people from WWE, legends, people who have left WWE to go to AEW. They're not being utilized properly. There could be synergies there. Does it happen? Do I think it happens? Realistically, I don't. But could it happen? Absolutely. Is it possible? I think it's a lot more possible than people will give credit to. And truth be told, it just makes wrestling better for the normal everyday fan.